So I want to talk about a couple of things tonight. I think first I'd like to talk about how I got into gardening myself, because I don't really feel like it was a path that many people have the opportunity to go through. So I grew up in a place called Murrurundi in the Hunter Valley, New South Wales. Anyone heard of Murrurundi? It's usually that kind of reaction, usually, isn't it? Sorry, I won't ask you to spell it. That's where it really gets challenging. That's where I credit my high level of adult literacy to, growing up in a town like Murrurundi. So my family ran a firearm business in there. They were firearm retailers and ran the local pig chiller. And for any of you who've lived in regional Australia, that's where they bring the feral pigs that the local hunters have shot, and they purchase them ready for export to Germany for the wild boar sausage. So a pretty colourful place for me to grow up, but not really a lot to do with gardening in that space. The town's small, 900 people, surrounded by a lot of bush. But on top of running the business, Mum also was a really keen gardener. We lived on a 2-acre block on the edge of this little town, and it was just a kind of clay and sandstone and shale paddock when we first moved in there. And over the course of my childhood, she transformed it into an amazing ornamental and native garden. So that was my first exposure to gardening. Except as a kid, any of you who have grown up with gardening parents or who have children yourself will know they don't usually get too excited about it, because living on a large block with such poor soil, summer holidays for me meant moving mulch. Mulch and mulch and mulch. The beginning of summer holidays would usually be heralded by a truck dumping 2 tons of wood chips on the front kind of median strip, and Mum looking at the wheelbarrow and going, "Enjoy, that's your summer." And then Dad would get me in winter for splitting the wood. So they shared me around. They shared the labour. But it didn't really instill in me any sort of love for gardening. It was something that was more of a pain, a chore, and something that was, eating into my valuable, adolescent, teenage years, where I should be hanging out with my mates, not digging wheelbarrows, shoveling wheelbarrows full of mulch around. So it wasn't until I left home that I guess I really fell in love with it. And that was when I was travelling around Australia at the age of 21, and someone told me that I should try woofing. I don't know if you're familiar with the woofing organisation. If you're not, it's willing workers on organic farms. And I fell in with this French guy in northern Tasmania. It was the first farm that I stayed on. And he had an incredible eye for aesthetic as well as production. So he had and he was a carpenter as well. So he built this amazing, house, and had a hand-dug stone-lined cellar that everything was made himself. The fittings he made himself. It was a masterpiece. It was a beautiful, beautiful home. And he'd grown up in the south of France, and so he'd gone about recreating this block in the style of Provence, where he was from. And so there was an incredible walled vegetable garden. There was a huge pome fruit orchard. We dug a well and lined it with stone. And all around the house was this incredible ornamental flower garden that was just constantly teeming with life. And I'd never seen anything like it, never in my life. I had no kind of university education, no tertiary education of any form. And I was just kind of this rudderless traveller that was looking for, I guess, some sort of inspiration, or maybe not, but it's what I found. And really, the experiences that I had there stay with me to this day, because there was nothing, like, I still can't compare that sensation or that feeling of being able to wake up, walk out into, an incredible landscape and pluck fruit from a tree that's still covered in dew. Like, that's an experience that every human being should have. And it wasn't until I'd actually had it myself at 21 years of age that I realised that had been a significant void in my life up until that point. That ability to be in nature in a meaningful way where you are physically connecting with it. So that's what sowed the seed for me, to use a gardening pun. And after that, I continued woofing, because I realised that I had no skills in that set. I could remove a lot of mulch, which is fine, but you have to be slightly more knowledgeable than just being able to swing mulch around a garden to actually have success. And then, so after woofing, that eventually took me to community gardening and the permaculture movement, which resonated very strongly because it was quite similar to what I saw on this French man's farm. And then I started cooking. What a great way to not garden as a chef. Anyway, if you're cooking at home, you can get a really good balance of kind of growing food and cooking it. But when you work in the hospitality industry, pretty much everything else ceases to exist in your life, and you get sucked into that stainless steel vortex. And I moved down here to Melbourne. I was living in Newcastle prior to that. And I started working in a restaurant called Vudamon here in Melbourne. That's where I did my apprenticeship. A pretty high stakes kind of restaurant. And so I spent 2 years there, which was, at the time, I thought amazing. I thought, yeah, this is really what it's about. Cooking with the best ingredients, serving the finest dishes in the land with the biggest wine list, and, the kind of bills that people drop on the table that with an open kitchen, you could actually see people like recoil in horror, which was always because this restaurant, no prices on the menu. It's that kind of place. They're like, here's the menu, order away, enjoy another course. And then at the end, they'd slip the beautiful leather bound kind of receipt holder onto the table. And oh man, you just see people go, I'm going to have to wash dishes for the next 6 years to pay that off. But towards the end of it, I realized that it had really moved me away from what I felt most strongly about, and that was the growing of food. The cooking, when you're in that hospitality, chefing world, cooking is what it's all about. I mean, we see a lot of, imagery in the media. Chefs love getting out onto the farms. They love, digging, doing a bit of muster and pulling some carrots out in their chef whites and, having the pictures taken to show how, much their restaurant or they themselves support local food. But for me, there was too much time spent inside in a kitchen in that fixed environment, too many working nights, and not enough time with my hands out in the soil. So I moved to Tasmania with my now wife, and we basically set about trying to work as little as possible in hospitality while trying to grow as much of our own food on a very small block down in South Arm. And that's when River Cottage happened. Someone got in touch with me and asked I applied. Someone got in touch with me and said, they're looking for a host, you should apply. And I did. And that's one of the reasons why I'm standing up here today talking to you lovely people. But I had a little bit of a second realization while I was living on that farm. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive. And it's definitely not a message that we came across, that we portrayed on the show. And to me, it was the realization that you really don't need to be living on 20 acres as the average person. That it's a very kind of lovely, and no offense if anyone here lives on 20 acres. But for me personally, I found that I was using more fuel. I had 2 cars for the first time in my life. My community life, although we made it look really great on TV, suffered more because of the physical isolation from the village itself and the amount of car travel that we were doing. So, when you drive past a friend in a car, you go like that. When you walk past someone on the street, you stop and talk for half an hour. And sometimes in Tilba, when you're driving past, you stop in the middle of the road and talk for half an hour anyway. So, you can get away with that stuff there. But I realised that the potential for connecting with what I thought was important about River Cottage is huge for most people, and you don't need to live on, as I said, 20 acres to do it. And what I found was in my kind of peripheral travel to the work that I was doing for River Cottage, just want to put that in the sentence one more time, sorry I'm repeating myself, was that everyone was like, yeah, one day, oh, Paul, we love what you do on the show, it's fantastic. Oh, one day, when the kids are out of home and we're in a better position, when this, when that, that's what we want to do. We want to move out to the country and, we want to get 20 acres and we want to milk a cow every day and we want to have a 1,000 square metre vegetable garden and we want to reforest a gully. Like, you don't want to do that. If you're retiring, that's not as kind of luxurious a lifestyle as it seems. And I asked all these people, they're like, yeah, one day. What are you doing now? And they're like, oh, we're like, we've got a house, we've got a couple of chooks, we've got a veggie garden, we've got some fruit trees. I'm like, what else are you after here? Like, you've got everything that you need in your backyard. So for me, my focus now that River Cottage is done and dusted is really trying to get people excited about growing food in backyards, because it's more important now than ever. I think, it's been through phases of necessity, vegetable gardening. And of course, when I talk about food growing here, I'm talking about chemical-free backyard vegetable growing. And the reason why I've titled this talk "The New Health App" was one, to give it some technological relevance, to make me sound like I could be doing this at a Google startup meeting. It's the new health app, and just because that's the kind of stuff that we talk about these days. So we've got, as a society, it seems like there's a whole heap of preventable health illnesses. There's increasing obesity, there's diabetes, there's a massive spike in mental health issues. The food that we eat through the supermarkets is increasingly dropping in nutritional value. And the news is full of bad news about climate change. It's for me, gardening was one of those things that it represents the silver bullet. It's the thing that all the bad stuff I think about in my life or in the world, it's really an excellent cure or an excellent way to address those. And obviously I'm preaching to the converted here, so I don't know how much scintillating new material you're going to get out of this talk. But in terms of physicality, gardening is almost what we were designed to do as people on that kind of backyard movement scale. There's a lot of health research and science coming out now that exercise isn't necessarily the right thing for us. The idea of, having a relatively sedentary life and then going out and busting yourself in the gym for an hour 3 times a week isn't the best for our bodies. It's, it gets us sweat up. Everyone thinks that's great. The best thing we can do is to move constantly and in a way that human bodies like to move. And that's gardening. It ticks all those boxes. Bed down, weeding, picking stuff up, carrying, reaching stuff out of the trees, twisting over, doing these little movements that the human body relishes. It's low impact, but the movement through gardening is essential, I'd say, for human health. Mental health as well. For gardening, there's a connection and there's a sense of delayed gratification and there's a sense of fostering life. There's not very many places in this world, short of keeping a pet or having a child, that you can be responsible for life and a steward of it and encourage it to grow and bloom. And gardening, really, that ability to be able to plant a seed and water it and what come to life in front of you, and then for vegetable gardening to have it bear fruit that you can enjoy, I think is something that resonates very deeply within people. And then communities. The way I learned to garden was through the woofing organisation and through community gardening. And I really came in with absolutely next to no knowledge at all about how to grow. But what I found was that the gardening and the food growing communities are some of the most open and generous there are, as I'm sure all of you people in this room would be aware of. It doesn't take much, especially coming from the hospitality world, where everyone's like, that's my secret recipe, I'll never tell you all the ingredients. I'm not going to share that with you. If you go to any sort of open garden or community garden, it's the polar opposite. Take some of this, take some seeds, take some cuttings, take this, take that, take all the information and knowledge that I've got. So backyard vegetable gardening as well also is an excellent way of maintaining local economies for human connection, not necessarily financially, but growing food, having that surplus, and being able to meet your neighbours through it. It sounds a little bit cliched, but I garden out the front of my house in Thornbury, and people stop all the time. People are fascinated by gardening. They want to know what you're growing. They love walking past and seeing how things are coming along, and they love it even more if they get a taste of it. And if I hadn't have done that, then I wouldn't have met half my street. So for me, I really feel like the next 6-7 months are going to be pretty exciting because it's the first time I've had a growing season in Melbourne. So I'm looking forward to getting the garden cranking up in full swing. But yeah, that's about all I can think about for the health app stuff.